welcoming our esteemed panelists for this discussion. Srimati Alka Upadhyay, IAS, Secretary, National Commission for Minorities, Ministry of Minority Affairs, Government of India. Mr. Amitabh Kant, India's G20 Sherpa, former CEO, NITI Aayog, Government of India. Dr. K.P. Krishnan, former Secretary, Ministry of Skill and Development, Government of India. Dr. Shamika Ravi, Member, Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister, India. Led by our moderator, Vikram Chandra, renowned journalist and thought leader, founder and managing director, Editorji Technologies. Over to you, Vikram.
Thank you so much, and it's such a pleasure to be here with such an illustrious panel and, of course, a very illustrious audience as well. We're going to kick off by really taking a look at livelihood, because as we all know, the question of employment, the question of livelihood, is something that has been at the back of all of our minds for a period of time now, and something tells me that that's only going to accelerate in the months and years and decades ahead, especially with new challenges coming, such as AI and the impact that could have on livelihood. So I'm going to just kick off straight away without too long an introduction. We can try and divide this into 4 or 5 areas: the architecture, what we need to do with skilling, what we need to do to deal with AI, what we need to do with regulations. So why don't I first start off with the basic question of looking at constructing. How should we be thinking about livelihood? What should be the construct of it? A lot of the focus so far has been job dena hai, government job dena hai, let's try and find a way of having welfare solutions to the problems that come with inadequate employment. Is that the way we should be looking about it? Or do we need to now start thinking about creating a new paradigm, where the paradigm itself leads to employment and leads therefore to a certain amount of welfare? Why don't I start with you, Dr. Shamika Ravi, and then we'll go in that direction.
Yeah. Thank you, Vikram. Namaste. Let's start out by first seeing how the data stacks up in the Indian story. You know, unemployment, labor force participation, a lot of these things are very strongly correlated with the growth rate of a state. So thinking of the labor market, Vikram, from an all-India perspective is actually quite misleading. India really has 28 vibrant state labor markets. Each state has very distinct set of not just rules and policies, but also culture, especially when it comes to women and so on and so forth. We see that the unemployment rates are actually quite low in states that are growing fast, including for youth, which traditionally you know that youth unemployment tends to be much higher. So that's number one. So improving ease of doing business, becoming business friendly, will lead to value creation or growth. And it's that value creation and growth which also leads to job creation. So I think it's important to understand that there is a very strong link between economic growth and jobs. That's number one. Number two, there is a peculiarity or idiosyncrasy, as we say in economics, to the Indian labor market as a whole, which is that our labor force participation traditionally has been rather low, much lower than many other emerging markets. So getting people to actively participate in marketed activity. We might have a lot of informal activity, but marketed, which means there's money transacted, that is relatively lesser than others. And therefore, labor market participation needs to be fostered in different ways. Third is this whole concept of graduate unemployment. Our youth who are most educated, which means graduate and above, are at least 4 times as likely to be unemployed compared to people or youth who have had school education and below. Now that is like putting the entire economics paradigm on its head, because when we went to college, we were told you better study hard because education is going to lead to a good job. That's why most of us studied and studied hard. Today, that's not the case. In fact, the more educated you are, the higher the chance that you are likely to be waiting for the right job. So there is also an expectation management side to the story, which we often miss, and I think it's a very large part of the story. Second is this big gap between degree and skill. Education and traditional education in India has meant we have a lot of educated people, degree holders, but the market actually values skill. So the market is saying, most of the industry surveys are telling you that today the biggest constraint to our growth is not finance, we can raise the capital. The biggest constraint to growth of existing firms, creation of new firms, etc., is skilled manpower. Now imagine the two things coexisting, that your firms are saying skilled manpower is our biggest constraint, and the highly educated are likely to be waiting and not working. Which means, why new education policy? Why Skill India? All of that convergence is required. Then, passingly you mentioned, but it really is a concern, which is government jobs. It's not an all-India phenomenon, by the way. But there is fascinating new evidence that has come out, particularly from the state of Tamil Nadu. It's in the Journal of Public Economics, which shows that, the cohort, because 4 years actually froze the recruitment in Tamil Nadu. So it becomes a natural experiment, and when they compare, then that cohort, which spend more than X number of years preparing for a government job, their lifetime earnings, and of course not getting in, because very small fraction actually get in, their lifetime earnings are lower than people who never sat for these exams. Now that tends to suggest that there's a very large, long number of the most productive part of youth, which is spent in an unproductive way. When you're neither acquiring a real skill, because exam taking, let's face it, is not really a skill, which is why this whole paradigm shift required to get people to actually learn craft, to be able to do something, which is why skilling now is becoming such a big policy priority. Right? So there are many elements to this livelihood story, and the more we look at it at a highly decentralized level, the more likely we are to come up with the right policy recommendations.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to turn to Dr. Krishnan, who was, of course, Secretary, Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. I think she outlined the problem really clearly, and there has to be an issue with the education system if you're turning out such a large number of people who are searching for a job and not being able to find a job, and yet there's a shortage of the people who actually have the skills that are required, especially in the modern age.
Yeah, thanks Vikram. Morning everyone. Like most issues, there are very complex sub-issues here, but let me just emphasize 4 of them given the time. Fundamental difference between education and what we call skill development or vocational education is ordinarily in the latter, in skill development, at least 70% of the learning is by doing in the employer's premises. So learning at the workplace constitutes the dominant part of skilling, unlike education where it's instructional. Point 1. Point 2, the point that Shamika made very eloquently, most employers, when you turn to them, their request is, can you give us kids with foundational skills? Domain skills we will teach them. Reading, writing, arithmetic, showing up. Atul has done a lot of this in his round 1 work and skills, where the entire emphasis used to be, can you bring these kids up to speed in terms of showing up on time, showing up clean, basic mathematics, basic linguistic skills in whatever language. And if that is still lacking, and it is the result of, let's say, the failure, for want of a better word, of the education system, can you impose the same burden now on the skilling ecosystem, which is again dominated by the same governmental apparatus? How is it that this apparatus is now suddenly going to deliver where the parallel apparatus of the same government did not deliver? Question 2. Question 3, employers, the current skilling ecosystem in India is very aligned with the formal sector requirement. The average job creator in India today is, let's say, a street corner Anthony garage, or a livelihood creator in the form of a restaurant. The requirements of these job creators is not what is driving the formal ecosystem. I'm still talking about apprenticeships to Tatas and L&T, who've been doing apprenticeships before the Indian Apprenticeship Act was born. Lastly, I think we need clarity on the roles of the union government, the state government, and the local government. These are big questions in skilling. Do you skill at the origin of the kid, or do you skill at the destination point where the kid is likely to land in a job? But across the world, the successful skilling systems are systems where the local governments play a critical role. The Union of India has the largest budget on this, but will what you do in, or what is required in Kamrup, be what you need to do in Vijayawada? No, they are fundamentally very different. So we need to summarize. Employer connect needs to be much stronger than it is today, and the employer is the non-formal employer. Importance of foundational skills as opposed to domain skills. Align it to requirements of the employers, and lastly, clarify roles of government.
I think that's a very clear agenda. Mr. Kant, the question of if you're looking at how what can be done at a structural level, one of the major issues is, one of the reasons why perhaps what Dr. Shamika Ravi was talking about, that graduates are looking for jobs and people with lower education are finding it. Many of them just get into the informal sector, the Anthony garage that we're just hearing from Dr. Krishnan. One of the reasons why people don't want to become formalized, or why small companies don't want to become bigger companies, is this entire web of, you don't want to tangle with the state, you don't want to get into regulations, you don't want to get into all the burdens of compliance. So somewhere that thicket of compliance and rules and all of that hassle is one of the things that is structurally preventing us from becoming more formal, becoming more organized, and then having, therefore, a lot more formal employment.
So three things. One is that, Vikram, the real challenge is in the eastern part of India, which are the most populous states. So the challenge arises in Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, UP, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan. They account for over close to about 58% of your population, and where this challenge is arising. And firstly, my view is that these states need to lay a lot of focus on improving learning outcomes, health outcomes, nutritional standards. This is a challenge for India. If you want to create an employable population, it's very critical that there's a huge movement towards improving learning outcomes and health outcomes. You can't have jobs for people in a country where you have a huge amount of stunting and wasting, and there's massive malnutrition. So the country needs to make a massive movement towards this. This is critical to my mind. Secondly, if you look at the large number of MSME, you'll realize that actually 98.8% are micro enterprises in India. Now, if 98.8% are micro enterprises, that means the micro enterprises are not becoming small, and the small is not becoming medium. So there's a challenge in the micro enterprises. And there, my view is that the basic problem is that we are not incubating these micro enterprises. There's a challenge of incubation, of hand-holding, of support, of finance, of many other things. So you need a formal training. You need to create many more incubators at the micro enterprise level. That is critical. The third viewpoint is that you can't have a country growing at high rates. In India, if you have 46% of your population dependent on agriculture, which is poorly paid jobs, really poorly paid jobs, we seem to have created a vested interest through Manrega and other schemes of ensuring that these people remain in agriculture. You need to do greater level of urbanization. Urbanization leads to innovation, it leads to good growth, and it should be manufacturing driven urbanization. I have my own experience of working on the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, where we created Shendra-Bidkin Corridor, Dholera, etc., is that it leads to enterprises which creates job, and there has to be a backward-forward linkage between small and large, medium and large enterprises. When large enterprises come in, they procure from tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 producer. That linkage needs to work very well, which is not happening. And fourth point I want to make is that our experience with skilling shows that for people who are skilled in India, the formal enterprises are not willing to pay a higher salary to skilled people. So it's also incumbent on the private sector to demand skilled people and pay a higher salary to them as compared to the unskilled. These are 3 or 4 points I wanted to make.
That's great. If I could just ask you, also, you've done a lot of work in animal husbandry and areas like that also. Talk to us about the formalization pathways a little bit, and specifically some of the things around rural India. What do people, there is a lot of, obviously, informal employment, which also means it's underemployment. They're technically employed, but they're working for themselves in some sort of a manner. So is that employment or is that not employment? If people have access, you were talking a little earlier about the experience of people working with Mother Dairy, for example, and things like that. Do people want to get formalized if they get the chance?
Yeah, thank you so much, Vikram, and good morning to everyone. So I'll just take a lead from what Dr. Krishnan was talking about and also briefly mentioned by Amitabh Kant sir. So, skilling is a great idea, but we can cater to only a set percentage of people. This entire skilling, employment generation, both in the private sector as well as the public sector. There is a large population, there's a large number of people who were skilled. I was leading the DDU GKY skilling program, and there was a compulsory 6 months skilling, 6 months placement embargo on the skilling partners that they have to give placement. But 6 months later, hardly 15 or 20% people stayed in the jobs because the urban environment was not conducive. Housing is a problem. The paltry salary is a problem. So they gradually went back to the villages. Now, cut to the villages, I have seen this movement of the National Rural Livelihood Mission, the entire growth story of self-help group women, very romantic, very good, and a lot of good work has been done. But the entire critical intervention needed here is, number one, the numbers. Number two, sustained capacity building. In the sense, even for people to be organized and think of something in common, that is something that has to be done. So a lot of work in NRLM was done for capacity building. Just small thrift, credit and thrift activities, having the self-help groups, the cluster level federations, etc., record keeping, accounts keeping, bookkeeping, all of these things, small things, but is leading to very positive results. So we have a lot of micro enterprises that have come up. Now the problem with micro enterprises in the rural area is most of them, most of them are agri-based, and two, they're all seasonal. So they will have a good livelihood for some time, and then rest of the year there would be nothing. So we have to look at the circularity of employment. The entire process has to be formalized. Now I'll talk about the self-help group because that's something that I know very closely and very well. Through the self-help groups, there was RBI intervention which said, okay, we will recognize SHGs and they can become now the lending, we can lend to these SHGs. The NP outstanding today is just about 1.7%. almost 11 lakh crores of funds have been mobilized. So creating the database of people, recognizing them as financial entities that they can also take credit is something important, which has to continue. But the problem here is when they form enterprises, we all are here as a part of the government. A number of things have been done, the MSME deregulations have happened, but still it's a long walk. And I would not say that it would be possible for every private enterprise to stand up and say, hey, we will be able to approach the government and we will be able to go to the banks. So a formalization process is essential. That's where the cluster level federations, the joint liability groups, which have all been accepted by NABARD, by the RBI, and the cooperative movement is now a key. I would just, as I was mentioning, both of these things have been taken care of in the cooperative movement as well as some of the micro enterprises that are now coming up to the National Rural Livelihood Mission. So I was telling the example of a coriander producing company which was set up, dhania ka beej, as a commodity in Kota Bara. Now they just had one commodity. What do they do for the rest of the year? So they got in soya bean. Everything was done, the enterprise was set up, but then they started finding problem in wholesale sale as well. So all those value chains, if they have found, and I'm sure with a bit of government push, a bit of intervention by the private players, this can happen very quickly. But the most beautiful, I think, way forward today is the multi-purpose cooperative societies. We've seen the case of Sabarkantha, the Mehsana Milk Union. They started as milk unions, but now they're into vegetables, they are into bio-CNG, so on and so forth. There was a driving force, and there was a collection of people, women, men, etc., who have taken this forward. But even at the top, we have to envision that this sector, which is not really going to be in a formal employment sector, which is going to be in a way a small enterprise or a small earning livelihood, will have to be handheld. They have to be institutionalized. Financing has to be done. One challenge I find is the rate of credit. Even the NCDC today has although it's just institutionalized, has a higher rate of interest. Unless until we bring down rates of lending, there will be a challenge. So at this point in time, I have this.
Right. Thanks for that, Dr. Chandra. Ravi, if I could just come back to you for the data on some of this. What is the data showing about the extent to which formalization is happening, the extent to which we need to, as Amitabh Kant was saying, move people from agriculture into other areas? Are there changes happening? Also, one of the new areas of employment that is really coming up a lot, and is it because it should be viewed as a way in which a lot of people will get jobs, which is the gig economy, people working as Uber drivers or Blinkit drivers and things like that. Is there something wrong with that? Should that be considered formal economy? Maybe they don't have as much job security as others do. Is it good enough livelihood? Different set of skills perhaps required? What are the data showing on all
this? These are lots of questions and there's lots of data. But I think at the heart of it, we must look at some broad indicators to ask, are things improving? And consumption, I think, is the best way to look at it, right? So if you just see the last 12 years, when we now have household level consumption expenditure, we can talk about the bottom 30-40% because India's poverty rate, even by Rangarajan poverty line, was 29.5% in 11-12. Today it is 3.9. So consumption is rising. Destitution is now minimal. Of course, again, there are state-wise variations. But you see, those are metrics of welfare. We should really, at a platform like this, also be talking about growth. Where will growth come from? And I think livelihood is at the heart of it, where the structural questions that we worry about as economists is, why is India's labor productivity not increasing? Why does it remain low for such long periods of time? And skilling is part of it, technology will be part of it, education and health, they're all part of solutions to increasing labor productivity in India. right? So that I think is important to understand. But economic growth requires us to also think differently, Vikram, about the way we have traditionally thought of supporting enterprise development. You see, whether it is the MSME, whether we have the priority sector lending if we look at the credit market, whether labor policies themselves, so far we have had a philosophy, and since you asked the question in the beginning, paradigm, I do want to say there needs to be a paradigm shift. So far we have been incentivizing small scale. So if you just look at the data, what is the scale of the firm? There is a lot of bunching of firms at micro, there's a lot of bunching at small, there's a lot of bunching at medium. तो हो क्या रहा है? ये हो रहा है कि I don't want to grow. So if I go from being a micro to double my size, I would rather register myself as two micro firms, because all those benefits and all those regulatory waivers, etc., which are there, are linked to my scale of operation. The paradigm shift which we have to attempt, and we have started to do in small ways, is we have to now incentivize, whether it's from any of these factor markets, capital, labor, etc., is growth. And that is why PLI was such an initiative. It's important to understand, if you grow, and the faster you grow, the better resources are going to be made available to you. So economic growth therefore needs to be that core. Then I want to also put some kind of a reality check, because we are assuming there's been a continuity in terms of policy itself when it comes to the nature of the economy. Till 2014, when I used to visit Delhi, I used to hear the phrase, India has missed the manufacturing bus. China is making everything cheap, so why would we focus on manufacturing or industry? We will have a peculiarly Indian model of economic growth and development, where we will transition from agriculture to services. Some intellectuals still continue to propagate that. But that's where you forget that 500 million people still in agriculture. Moving everyone to services is just not going to happen. There's a reason it has never happened historically in any country. But more importantly, manufacturing is not just about cheap industrial products, cheap electronics or cheap any manufacture. It's about livelihoods. And this is where I want to give you one example to highlight why policy priority and the vision and the way the structure of the economy changes and the way Delhi thinks actually has an impact on the ground, which is, in many of the industrial corridors of Tamil Nadu, when we've done surveys, because these are highly industrialized belts, copper wire for instance, where they are getting their mid-management people, because there's such a shortage of skilled manpower. The youngsters now I'm getting them, right? Mid-management means 15 to 20 years of work ex. There just aren't enough people. So the recruitment is, these firms are going and hiring mid-managers from Spain and Italy. Can you imagine the cost structure? Now, why is it that we have such a shortage of mid-management skilled manufacturing HR? Because until 10 years back, we basically told all our students, become an engineer, become a coder, become a software, sabko service karna hai. Everybody wants to get into consulting. Manufacturing as a job, as a livelihood, was really a lowly activity. So you see, policies do have real-time impact in terms of the way youngsters view their career and profession and what they opt for. We really have to make manufacturing cool again, because it is linked to jobs. Now, when we started looking at what are the products that we import from China, around the pandemic when they denied us the APIs, there was one exercise we did just to see, well, how dependent are we in terms of products? And you'll be surprised. Umbrellas, sofas. This is not high-tech, these are not jet engines. The common media narrative that high technology stuff is what we know. We are dependent for the simplest of products. And of course we have the means to do it. It's just that we felt we didn't need to do it. We would all be doing services. So it's important for you to understand that the thinking, the policy, the paradigm that you're talking about actually has real impact on the ground. And there has been a 180-degree transformation as far as manufacturing and the role of industries in India's economy is concerned.
So, Dr. Krishnan, that paradigm shift that is being spoken about will therefore again have to come into providing those skills. So, when you're looking at this, if you are trying to move 40, 45, 50% of the people who are in agriculture or who are essentially unemployed but are, self-employed, they are sitting on in a chai shop. There are 3 people manning a chai shop and saying, technically they're employed, but actually they probably are not. Now you have to get them into the system. You have to get them some sort of a way of earning their livelihood. Does that require training them in manufacturing, figuring out what the skills are in manufacturing and training them for that? Potentially training them for the sort of skills that could be required for the gig economy or the platform economy. There are different level of skills. Maybe just, God knows we need people to be able to drive a little bit better. And how do you drive a scooter and not kill yourself or somebody next to you? Those are also skills that need to be imparted. Functional skills that can help somebody get a job.
Yeah, we obviously, skilling will respond to whatever the economy, the society needs. If there are jobs in manufacturing, we will need skilled people in manufacturing. But I think the underlying point, taking off where Shamika left in terms of the broad macro, clearly, I think one cannot at all disagree that growth is fundamental to all this. That is the engine that will pull everything along. How do you bring that about? And I want to put this in sort of similar macro terms. If 1991 was about rebalancing the role of state and markets in India, it went some distance and did wherever it was opportunistically doable, which is all the more formal sectors. We need to rebalance the role of state versus markets in all of these more difficult sectors. And to give what may sound like a violent, outlandish example, if you take a nano enterprise today, a street cart or a thela person, somebody making samosa at the corner, the biggest enemy of this nano entrepreneur is the state. And the state for him or her is not Secretary MSME or Amitabh, Kant or Krishnan or Alka. The state is the municipal inspector who comes and takes the hafta, the street constable, and since he's quote unquote a squatter, his electricity or her electricity is illegal. So the notion of state for 95% of India's enterprise that are actually creating large livelihoods is a villain. This state is not going to be my answer. We therefore need very fundamental revisiting of this, and this has been done. Just to give you one example, state that Kant sir worked a lot of his earlier days in Kerala. When I was in skills, we had done, and we were trying to hawk the new entrepreneurship program, the apprenticeship program, where for every employer, if he or she employed a kid and let's say paid a 10,000 rupee stipend, 5,000 the government of India had announced would come from its kitty. The balance 5,000 only had to be paid by the employer. It's a huge incentive, 50%. Very few takers. We were wondering why is this? So we go to this famous Antony, which is not a mythical Antony. There is an Antony, multiple Antony garages. This one is a chota, two-wheeler repair shop. He, with a translator, he said, I don't want to talk to you guys. So we persuaded him, batao kya hai ye wo. To cut a long story short, he said, I have 3 kids who are, we've dealt with all of them, the standard chotus that you meet when you go to get your scooter repaired. That chotu is learning multiple skills. He or she will never be certified because he is doing auto electrician, he is doing motor vehicle repair, he is also learning tea making. Mem saab ko jara pankha lagao. He is doing multiple schemes. I have no system which recognizes these multiple skills, but more important, if I want to bring that kid into the National Entrepreneurship Promotion Scheme, his employer has to register. He said, I want to have nothing to do with you guys because next morning, Kottayam municipality will come and shut my shop down. What is the answer? The Kerala State Auto Repair Association came forward and said, we are ready to be the employer. Don't ask us to unmask and bring this employer in the front. It worked. Now, this was a local solution which handled the state interface problem in a creative way, and the solution came actually from the Kottayam municipality, livelihood, whatever that name, I'm forgetting the official designation. So there are enormous creative solutions for all of these. Decentralize. India will find solutions. Indian entrepreneurs know this game better than all of us. Indian markets work. Allow them to work.
But Dr. Krishnan, I think that's a fantastic example of jugaad in action and how you find creative solutions to get around a problem which is, frankly, chains of red tape that we have tied around our own feet. So if you're talking about a paradigm shift, it's time to think about a paradigm shift in the way all of this compliance and regulation holds the country back. Amitabh, Kant, remember on an episode of the India Story podcast that I did with you, you said India can grow at 9%. You began by saying that. India can grow at 9%. How do we grow at 9%? Cut this thicket of compliance and regulation. Why is it that people do not want to register for skill entrepreneurship? It's because interfacing with the state is something that is a problem. Why is it that a small company does not want to become a larger company? The point of growth that Dr. Ravi was just talking about. It is simply because if you go higher up and you become a larger company, that much more compliance burden, that much more regulation. I don't want to deal with the hassle. Why does somebody want to deal with it? So we will remain small. That's the paradigm shift we need, I think, in 2020.
So Vikram, let's look at the larger perspective of India being a $4 trillion and Prime Minister setting a vision of $30 trillion economy. I mean, what does this mean? This means that your GDP has to grow 9 times, your manufacturing has to grow 16 times. I mean, without manufacturing growing 16 times, you can't create jobs. It's not possible to create jobs. Now, the challenge is that when you go to Chhattisgarh or you go to Jharkhand and you talk, which I've done recently, 82%, in Chhattisgarh, 82% of the employment is in agriculture. And they want to subsidize the political system, and the administrative system wants to subsidize agriculture more and more. My view is that the more you invest in agriculture, you will create poorly paid jobs, and the poorer the state will become. The more you invest in agriculture, the poorer the state will become, and that is what is happening in the eastern part of India, that the political will to manufacture, to do urbanization, to create good quality infrastructure just doesn't exist. For them, the vote bank is the agriculture sector because 82% of the people are in agriculture. They want to keep subsidizing that. That is the basic problem, number one. Number two is, to the point which Shamika made about PLI, as someone who would conceptualize the concept, let me say PLI is not the solution for India. PLI is an interim answer to companies becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, but eventually India has to become competitive. If it has to become, you can't live on subsidies that you produce more, I'll give you more. The answer is that we'll provide you support for a period of 5 years, but at the end of the 5 years, India must become cost competitive. That means that your DISCOM should be efficient to give you electricity at the right price points. You should be able to get skilled manpower. You should be able to get large-scale land for manufacturing, etc. And my view is that's the critical point of making India very cost competitive. Thirdly, if you want to grow at these rates, at high rates, it's not, you need to fire on all cylinders. You need to do services, but you need to do smart urbanization, where India has been a very reluctant urbanizer. States do not have the political will to urbanize. Urbanization will be a very key driver of job creation in India. States have just lacked the political will to even make your census towns as cities today. So they treat them as rural areas because you get the benefit of rural scheme. So the political will for urbanization has to exist. The agriculture productivity, India's agriculture productivity is at an abysmally low level. You have 46% employment in agriculture, but your productivity levels are very low, so you have to enhance that. And fourthly, to the point, my own experience is that I've worked in fisheries sector of Kerala for 4 years. My personal view on micro enterprises is that you need, Kerala fisheries sector could evolve because we formed self-help groups, but we provided them the right technology. We provided them outboard motors, we provided them fiberglass crafts, we provided them new fishing nets, which was the disco nets, we handheld them, we opened their bank accounts, we monitored, we ensured that 50% goes back into their bank accounts because they were fishermen, were prone to drinking. It requires a lot of hand-holding, it requires technology. We introduced beach level auctioning so that there could be intersection of demand and supply at the beach level. They used to get just 18% of the market price. We were able to take it to 82% of the market price simply because we introduced beach level auctioning. We introduced buses for fisherwomen so that they could go to the city and sell the daily fish catch. It requires a lot of hand holding, but it requires technology, it requires opening of bank accounts, it requires a lot of training and skilling at that level. That is the job of the state governments. It can't be done thinking that central government will do it. It's not feasible. So that micro level enterprises growing into self-help groups, growing bigger and bigger and bigger and becoming into small and small, growing bigger and bigger and getting into macro enterprises is really the key to long-term solution. But eventually India needs a lot of deregulation. I mean, I can't fathom why factories laws where parliament has passed and states have passed, why we not, 75% of the rules and regulation which is holding India back in terms of size and scale of large enterprises coming in is because of factory laws.
So to that point, the rules and regulations that were designed to encourage employment, specifically some of the labor laws which I declined, and the compliance laws sometimes that a bigger factory has is, how are you doing your canteen committee and how are you whitewashing your bathrooms for the welfare of the workers, but those in a sense hold back employment. Would you agree with that, Alkaji? Do we need to do something about it?
Would Shamika like to take?
Yeah. Maybe you can come in straight away into that, and then I want to also come to you on the last question before we run out of time is on AI, how that could impact. But is there a lot of work being done on this?
I'll tell you what the data tells us very clearly, that the states which have actually reformed labor laws at the local level, so states which are therefore business friendly, every time India enters a free trade agreement, which means the market opens for specific segments, states which have business friendly labor laws gain much more. Which means that when the market expands, if you are ready through labor laws, better labor laws, you do gain.
And lower compliance burden.
It's part of the same story, right? To the gig question in particular, Vikram, gig is the future, right? There is the reason the world is moving towards contractual. And by the way, I think there needs to be clarity in the way we think of public policy in India as well. In Japan, and I'm not saying they are the pinnacle of everything that is right, but in many ways they are. But because there is no senior citizen welfare pension scheme, the nature of which you typically think of, people work till they're 80, 85, 90. Which means, yes, of course, we have to work on pension reforms and we do have to take care of elders and so on. But I'm just trying to tell you that labor welfare is not the first priority when you think of growth. You would have no growth. So what does welfare even mean? It's like coming up with 6 months of paid maternity leave and the firms really just resubstituting away. So in India, we do have a dissonance. In terms of making policies and laws, we behave like first world countries. The point is, we have just come out of poverty. How much welfare can the economy afford? And what is the least cost of doing it? So when it comes to gig markets, the fact that you have hundreds of thousands of young men and women employed in delivery business, yes, by the way, it is AI application. I don't want you to think of these as menial jobs. There is value in the market. You're seeing equity markets respond. But also these are jobs. These are sought after jobs. To think that welfare usme nahi hai, and hence, please, I do not want you to think of these as menial job.
Right.
So
And-
gig is the future, and I think we have to be far more business
Well, the
friendly.
other thing, so I think we have about 2 minutes to go, so what the other people believe could be the future is AI, and that's something which we get just about 2 minutes to talk about, Akali. Is that going to change everything, and whatever we are planning now, should we be planning for massive disruptions coming from AI?
So a few years back, or maybe 2 or 3 years, when AI was, the buzzword, if we got somebody to speak on anything, they would say, we are doing AI, we are doing machine modeling, so on and so on. I got very angry. What is it that you are going to offer? Because actually there were no answers to it. But today, as I see it, it's transformational. I'll just talk about the agri stack that is being built. It maps all the assets of the agri farmers. It puts the right person in queue, putting in good algorithms. It will put the right person in queue for whatever support the government is going to give without any human intervention. That is one. Number two, I am a big fan of creation of these databases, the women's database, the animal data that we did, the National Digital Livestock Mission, where we identified each and every animal which was to be vaccinated and created a unique ID, of course not to talk about Aadhaar, etc., etc. With this database that we have, I think if we do good modeling, the results are going to be fabulous. We know where to approach and what to be done. But today, as I read more about AI and see the examples, I find something very fascinating. Actually, AI is also going to democratize knowledge information. And we have been talking about this educated elite class people who have, not elite, but educated youth, who simply running chat GPT, etc., they are able to elicit answers. Going back to the story of the National Rural Livelihood Mission, where we have about 150,000 community workers, today some of these women are asking questions on ChatGPT. What is the soil nature going to be like? They're just feeding in simple information. What is the soil health like? What is it that the weather is saying? All of this data is available. They know when to sow. Breed management, we have the indigenous chips which are going to be profiling the genotypes of all the good breed in India, so we have better breed management, so on and so forth. Access to answers in vernacular through AI, I think, is the single biggest contribution that will happen in the sector that we are going to be talking about. And it's simply fascinating. If we can train our community workers, if we can train our youth on this, I think this is going to give very good results. Thank you.
I think we could keep on going on in this subject for a long time, but I'm seeing a sign saying that time's up. So thank you all so much for joining us. Clearly, a lot of work needs to be done in the area, and hopefully we're going to move in the right direction. Thank you so much.